Good morning, everybody. I'm Roslyn Prinsley, and I'm the Head of Disaster Management in the Institute for Climate, Energy and Disaster Solutions, and I'm hosting the event this morning. And before I do anything else, I would like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people who are the traditional custodians of this land on which we are meeting today, and pay respect to the elders of the Ngunnawal Nation, both past, present and future. I extend this respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in this meeting today. So my next task is that I'm very delighted to introduce our Vice-Chancellor, Professor Brian Schmidt, serving as ANU Vice-Chancellor since 2016, and of course you all know the winner of the 2011 Nobel Prize in Physics. Professor Schmidt is one of Australia's most eminent scientists. Professor Schmidt has spent most of his academic career as an astrophysicist at ANU before becoming Vice-Chancellor, and we thank him very much today for making the time to open our event. In 2015, at Lake Constance in Germany, I was privileged to watch proudly 70 Nobel laureates introduce the Meinau Declaration on climate change. These Nobel Prize winners came together to state categorically that climate change is real and the world community needs to act on it. I'm sure that he is excited as I am to learn today about these stories of hope where ANU scientists are collaborating to find solutions and to better understand the challenges we face to help to address climate change, the energy transition and disaster. So before anything else happens, thank you, Brian. Look forward to your opening remark.
Thanks, Roslyn. I appreciate the warm welcome and good to see everyone. I too acknowledge that we are here on Ngunnawal Ngambri land, and indeed Ngambri Creek used to go right through here, which is now known as Sullivan Street. Probably should think about renaming this point. And so this has literally been the meeting place for 1,000 generations of people in this part of the world. We pay our respects to elders past and present. So I do thank the ANU Institute for Climate, Energy and Disaster Solution. Maybe not my favorite name of an event, of a group here, it's so long. ICEDS, a little easier for me. And I do appreciate being invited along today because this is something near and dear to my heart. As Roz said, 2015, when I was at Lindau, we decided to do the second ever statement of the Nobel Prize winners because we felt, following on from a similar event done in 1954 on nuclear war, that it was so precarious going into the Paris talks that we needed to come together, and that was something I ended up leading because someone had to do it, but a lot of enthusiasm, and indeed it was presented to the group in Paris by two of my colleagues. There in the Paris COP talks. So I am excited here today to find out about this seed-funded research and what it's delivering. We need these little ideas to come up because from little things, big things grow, I guess, is the Australian song, and Kevin Carmody, who we gave an honorary knock, wrote and sang for us at our degree ceremony last year. And these are, as I said, the building blocks, hopefully, for the things that come. And I hope that we'll see some real novelty in ideas, things that spark a broader conversation within this audience, because again, ideas can cascade into other ideas. In the end, the ideas that we're talking about are here to benefit all of humanity through the things that we do to tackle climate change, but also make the necessary energy transition and deal, unfortunately, as we adapt to this new world that is creates disasters that are on a scale and frequency that we're just not used to. We know from the work of expert bodies like the IPCC that climate change impacts are worsening, that the increasing frequency of disasters is really increasing the need for rapid decarbonization, but as I said, to the adaptation. And I think we're going to hear a little bit of all that today. Certainly, ANU has felt the brunt of natural disasters. We have had rain events. The one where Amber Creek found its path, its past path in 2018, caused a lot of damage, including taking out the bottom floor of our library. We had a hailstorm, which, these things individually are hard to ascribe to climate change, but it's the increasing frequency of things like that. That hailstorm is the second largest insurance claim of an institution in the history of Australia, just to show you the scale of it. And of course, the bushfires that were just beyond any comprehension. You think of just how big they were. They ended up dumping a equivalent amount of stuff in the atmosphere of, a Pinatubo-like volcano. So these are truly monumental events that we're going to have to figure out, and they're going to manifest themselves in all sorts of interesting ways that I think we still have to get our head around. Ultimately, they're complex problems and require really good minds across different disciplines working together to solve them. And so that ultimately means interdisciplinarity and innovation. And for the university's part, we're going to need to be resourceful, and the university does have a lot of resources. And I think it's easy in these days to say we're poor. No, we have $1.2 billion a year to spend. So we need to spend it well. And so one of the things we can do is in this area, and why we continue to support ICEDS in this time of need. So tackling these challenges together is something that we will continue to do, I think, for the rest of my academic career and probably beyond. We launched ICEDS in 2021 because we knew we needed to bring together the integrated solutions to face these interlinked challenges of today. So it's a novel center. It involves literally a quarter of the academic staff at ANU, because global sustainability, which it really is tackling, is that big of a problem and so interconnected into all that we do. 570 researchers in total, and they provide the institute provides a framework which these challenges can be approached in an integrated way. And so the projects today showcase, I think, the broad expertise required to address the issues, including some technical, scientific, and social approaches. And we have 5 of the 7 colleges represented today, and hopefully each presenter will take us through the research that traverses Australia and beyond. We're going to be looking at everything from psychology to hydrogen, carbon removal in Pacific Island countries, to socially just energy transitions in the agricultural sector. And that's just the first few. So I'm going to hand back to you now, Roslyn, so that we can commence the presentations. And I will say in advance, well done to everyone for getting this. Really look forward to the presentations as we see them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. And I'm also looking forward to the presentation. And welcome everyone who's just coming in now. You just missed Brian, we're just about to hear the presentation. So, first of all, I'd like to welcome Dr. Emily McLeod from the ANU Research School of Psychology. And Emily's going to be presenting to us their research on Australian psychology workforce capacity in these times of bushfires, COVID-19 and floods, where the demand for services of psychologists is being really overwhelmed, which is something that we really need to think hard about. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you. So I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we meet today on, pay respect to elders past and present, and acknowledge the language of people. So today I'm going to be talking about research that was funded by an ICEDS grant to look at Australian psychology workforce capacity in the context of the recent disasters that we've experienced. And this work was completed as an extension of the Australian National Bushfire Health and Wellbeing Study. So since late 2019, psychologists in Australia have been working in the context of multiple disasters, including bushfires, storms, extreme flooding, COVID, and they've had ongoing effects on the mental health of Australians and the Australian community, putting lots of pressure on psychologists and increasing demand for services. The aim of this research was to understand the impact of recent disasters on psychologists' practice and wellbeing, and to understand how best to continue to support psychologists to be able to provide essential services to their communities and to be prepared for the next disasters. So we interviewed 12 stakeholders working in the psychology space. So these were practitioners, leaders, managers, interest group representatives across private, public and peak body psychology spaces. And then in November and December 2022, we surveyed 469 psychologists about their disaster experiences and the impacts that these have had on them. So I'm going to talk about some of the key findings from the survey for today's talk. So these included that a third of psychologists had been impacted by disasters personally, and this rate increased to 2/3 when we looked at professional and other impacts, indirect impacts. Psychologists said that the consequences of the cumulative disasters over the last, since the 2019 through 20 bushfires were increases in waitlist and workload and increases in complexity and severity of the client work that they were doing. To manage workload pressures, psychologists engaged in really appropriate strategies, including professional development, supervision, peer supervision, self-care. But despite this, the negative personal impact of the disasters on psychologists remained high. So we saw over a third of psychologists experiencing depression or anxiety symptoms, a quarter of psychologists experiencing burnout, and a further 35% were in danger of burnout, and almost half of psychologists were experiencing low well-being, which is related to an increase in mortality. So not ideal. And then in response to demands, almost half of the workforce either left their roles or left the sector that they were working in, and citing reasons, citing that they were leaving because of unsustainable work pressure or undesirable work culture. And in terms of the expected impacts of climate change on psychologists' future work, over 2/3 of psychologists thought that climate change was going to have a moderate or critical impact on the work that they were doing in the next 5 to 10 years, but less than 1 in 3 psychologists actually felt prepared to manage the mental health needs of the community in response to disasters. And psychologists said the key priority areas that they wanted professional development in were cumulative trauma, loss and grief, and resilience building. So we're currently in the process of putting together a report where we go into much finer detail about these findings, and we're going to provide some recommendations about how to stabilise the psychology workforce and promote mental health and wellbeing and prepare psychologists to better be able to manage future disaster needs in the community. We'll analyse the interview data. We're collaborating with the Australian Psychological Society to disseminate the research findings and to be able to use these findings to hopefully influence policy and practice recommendations. And we're also looking at opportunities for future funding so that we can expand the scope of this research from psychologists to the wider mental health work. Thank you.
Right, thank you. So thank you very much, Emily. I think this is an issue that we really need to be concerned about, given the intensification of these frequent disasters, and hopefully your research will make a difference to how we train our psychologists and get more of them where they're needed. Next, I would like to welcome Jack Miller. Jack. Jack is an ANU PhD undergraduate student and Tuckwell scholar, and he's very smart. He's been working with me on how we might stop cyclones, which sounds like a bit of a pie in the sky dream, but we think it's definitely worth giving it a go, given what's happening with cyclones and climate change. He's come up with his own innovative approach to using AI models to predict cyclone trajectories. And today he's presenting his research with his team up here on using AI to generate cyclone data via learned physical constraints. And I'll let Jack explain that to you as clearly as possible.
Well, hello everybody, and good morning. So this is some work using deep learning applied to cyclones that was done primarily by myself, Jack Miller, and Charles O'Neill, another undergraduate, under the supervision of Navid over the Research School of Earth Science, and Omri Azenkot, who is a professor in Israel, alongside the help of the artificial intelligence and some people at the Mathematical Sciences Institute. So our main goal with this project was to predict a cyclone's trajectory and how it would act in the future. And so how this has been done in the past is with fairly large scale numerical weather prediction. And so, you know, the bomb will go out and will say, hey, there's a cyclone forming off the coast here. Let's apply a really large scale simulation which solves the physical equations to get the motion of the cyclone into the future, how it will evolve. Unfortunately, although this is quite accurate, it's very expensive and quite slow. Generally, these calculations are done on a large supercomputer here at ANU, and they're very expensive to compute. So you really only want to do it if you're doing large-scale research or if there's a cyclone on the horizon. What we instead do is look at using a statistical deep learning model for this task. And so this is a sort of AI model. And this is very cheap to use. Instead of taking hours to predict the next step of a cyclone, it could take seconds. But unfortunately, using this technology comes with some drawbacks. Often the results are unphysical. They don't obey the laws that we know about the atmosphere, and they're hard to train because there actually isn't that much cyclone data available. And so how do we build such an AI model if there's not much data and current approaches are not very physically realistic? Well, as I just said, AI models learn about the world through data. And the largest database of cyclone examples only contains about 4,000 tracks. So we only know of about 4,000 cyclones that have occurred since 1970 and have good data on these. And so generally when you're training an AI model, it's very data hungry. So it wants millions and millions of examples. For example, ChatGPT, which we've heard a lot about, was trained on billions and billions of sentences. And even that is flawed in a lot of ways. So to reduce the amount of data that we need, we decided to try and imbue the AI model with various physical rules so that it could sort of learn from the physics that we understand about the system and then apply that to the problem of cyclones. And so in the past, papers have just applied AI without any consideration of the physics of the system. So instead, we decided to try and teach the model some physics. And so, having done so, we found that teaching the AI model, unsurprisingly, I suppose, about the physics of the system improved accuracy for cyclone predictions, and also some other scenarios that we care about. So a physics-informed AI model that we trained improved cyclone wind speed prediction by about 40% after 24 hours. And on the other relevant tasks, sea surface temperature prediction, which can be used to predict cyclogenesis, the formation of cyclones, we were able to improve predictions on a 6-month basis by about 200%. And this is compared to AI models which don't have physics imbued on them. And so you might be asking, well, what can we do with this? Well, we can more accurately predict the movement of cyclones using a very cheap model. So we might be able to answer the question, how will a Category 3 storm evolve south of Cairns? And so what we can do is we can use this model to say, go from there to there in seconds, rather than there to there in 4 hours with spending 10,000 or 100,000 volts. So yeah, hopefully adding physics to the system has made it more accurate, and because it's an AI model, it's a lot cheaper. So in conclusion, using physical constraints on AI models is probably a good idea in this space. And as such, we can generate cheaply synthetic but realistic new cyclone trajectories. And so we can explore much more about how a cyclone might evolve in a particular region. And we might be able to create cyclone data sets for researchers to use to prepare for new cyclone situations. And all in all, this should lead to better preparation for future events by giving researchers a cheap tool to generate new cyclone paths and trajectories. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So anyone has seen Jack present on this to some more informed direct AI and model understanding type of audience, you will know that that was an extremely clear presentation for people that are not. So thank you very much, Jack. Now I know that most people have lots of questions for Jack and for Emily and for our next speakers. Just to remind you all that there's no questions during the session, but straight after the session, Jack and Emily and the other speakers will be sitting at their own tables out in the foyer and be able to ask them any question you like during lunch. So I'd like to now introduce Amy. You know, you're going to get your name wrong. Amy Dahl, who's going to talk. Amy's a senior lecturer and HDR convener at the ANU School of Medicine and Psychology. She's been working in a research program looking at how mothers and child mental health have been affected by the bushfires. But she's particularly today going to talk about how partners influence mother and child mental health following the climate crisis. Thank you very much, Amy.
Thank you very much for this wonderful opportunity to share our research here today. To give context to our project, I need to take us back to the start of 2020, when New South Wales was facing some of its worst bushfires ever. Now, of course, the impacts for everybody were significant, but particularly for our most vulnerable citizens, including women who were pregnant during this period. At the same time, we had COVID-19 on the horizon, coming just months after the impact of these bushfires, raising potential for synergistic effects of these crises in terms of not just physical health, but also mental health for women at that time and the longitudinal impacts on their families. This is the context of the original Mother and Child 2020 study, which was really focused on understanding how bushfires, COVID-19, and the pregnancy experiences were linked up in physical and mental health with longitudinal impacts for child outcomes. What we saw in these original waves of data collection, though, was that mothers were highlighting for us there was a critical link missing from understanding what was happening in the system. Mothers were constantly reporting that the role of their partners in supporting them through these periods of crisis and isolation was fundamental. We also heard that around 61% of mothers were saying that their partners were able to spend more time involved in caring for their children during this period. And this is really where our team comes in. Now, Amina had been involved in the NC 2020 study since the start, but Leanna and I were entirely new to this in May last year. We came together over a shared interest in understanding the family dynamics and the whole role of the emotion coping for the family in this space. And as you can see, this is a team that represents all the schools across the College of Health and Medicine. Now, we're very grateful that the ICEDS funding became available at an opportune moment for us, which enabled us to get the resources we needed to get this project off the ground by employing our wonderful project officer, Catherine, who had a really critical role here in getting our ethics protocol through and the study data collection up and running and overseeing that. At this point in time, we now have our full data set. Now, we're really excited about this because one of the reasons that partners were missing and linking this study originally, and from the broader literature as well, is that they're notoriously hard to recruit into these projects. Our original estimate, and it was an optimistic estimate, was that we would get a ratio of 1 partner to every 5 mothers. and we ended up with 1 in 4, so we're really delighted with this. Our data is also pointing to the critical role of partners here, with around half of them either providing most of the care or equal care as well. Now that we have partner mental health data, we can better understand how that's linked to mother's outcomes and indirectly to the child outcomes, both in the current way and as we move forward. Also, of course, it allows us to understand those direct impacts on the child from the partner. But most critically here, we have some crucial measures of coping and co-parenting within the dyad that help us understand these dynamics and how they ultimately play out in the family system. At this point in time, we're working on data screening and linking that data back to the many waves of previous data that we have sitting there. And this is going to put us in a really good position in semester 2 for each of our 3 CIs to be driving the manuscript on their area of expertise. So a couple of suggested titles here, including contributions of couple dyadic coping and adjustment to child outcomes following community crisis. And by the end of the year, we expect to be in a good position to provide advice to our community and government about how we can connect with families broadly and make use of the resources that partners have to support mothers and their children as we face future crises, building resilience in our communities. So a big thank you to our broader team for the NC 2020 study and for your time today.
Thank you very much, Amy. So moving now from Australia to low-lying Pacific Island countries, which obviously have a lot to fear from climate change. I would now like to welcome Dr. Sarah Beavis. Sarah is a senior lecturer and associate director postgraduate coursework at the ANU School for Environment and Society, and she'll be presenting maximizing the co-benefits of nature-based solutions for carbon and renewable projects. Thank you very much, Sarah.
All right, thank you very much and good morning to you all. In this very quick presentation this morning, I'm going to briefly outline the key aspects of this project and also the practical outputs that involve local communities and benefit those communities. So while I'm the CI for this project, it very much is complementary to my PhD student, Nick Meadows' studies. He's currently in Fiji now, still working there. So the project is located on the main island of Fiji, Viti Levu, and in Fiji, river floodplain communities are vulnerable to severe flooding. And over the past 5 years, such flooding has occurred in each year. And the vulnerability has been amplified by landscape degradation with the clearing of riparian vegetation, resulting in erosion and soil loss, and in particular stream bank collapse. The case study for this project is in the Bar River catchment, a major catchment on Viti Levu. And here in 2012, extreme rainfall, flooding, and land use dynamics really coalesced and culminated in extensive stream bank collapse at Wagawaglu settlement. And so this became one of the first villages in the Pacific to be moved as part of the government-planned climate change relocation program. Within these contexts, this project is focused on afforestation and the measurement, reporting and verification for carbon removals along these riverbanks to support stream bank integrity and reduce erosion. So the research aims and links to ICEDS. The research involves climate and disaster risk vulnerability assessment of the area to identify sites where tree plant risks of soil loss and stream bank collapse to communities. The project aligns with focus areas of ICEDS of disaster risk reduction and carbon removals. When we start to consider the methods, it's already there, it seems to be timed accordingly, get me through quickly. The assessments have been undertaken of the riparian vegetation, and stream bank. And these assessments have been based on field measurements that have been taken both across the wet and the dry seasons, as well as remote sensing and participatory mapping, all of which provide a first layer of evidence of risk, exposure and vulnerability. And I should note that none of this work would be possible without our local in-country collaboration, researchers and partnerships. So preliminary results have provided us, first of all, with water quality measure, and that's identified spatial variability of water quality along that distance, including hotspots of pollutants that have been associated with sugar mill, but also signs of anomalously high turbidity or suspended sediments in the water column within the river. There have been stream bank measurement sites that have identified areas of high erosion risk. Measurements of several hundred trees have provided baseline data on above ground biomass carbon. There's work that's been done providing results on the density and composition of the riparian vegetation, and that's been assessed through mangrove forests, sugar cane areas and forest and woodland as well. And finally, flood risk mapping has been undertaken, showing the locations of vulnerable infrastructure as well as productive land. So from these results, we've worked very closely with local communities to identify where best to locate plant nurseries. And seeds have been provided by the Ministry of Forestry, who've been very supportive. And 2 sites now have been selected and are now being established, as you can see in those diagrams there, for establishing trees and shrubs for riparian planting. So I'd like to acknowledge at this stage, with thanks, the funding from ICEDS, and also to thank the community partners who are working on and continuing to establish those nurseries. So thank you, and I'll come back ahead.
Thank you very much, Sarah. That sounds like a lot of work that's been done in a short time. I would now like to welcome Dr. Annabelle Hunty. Annabelle's from the ANU Corporate School of Public Policy, and she's been working with Professor Kuntala Lahiriya and partnering with vulnerable, climate-affected communities in the Sundarbans in India to present their perspectives, those communities' perspectives, of how change adaptation can best support their needs. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, and thank you for being here today, and hope I can cover the key points in this short presentation. Otherwise, please come and visit us after. So we're very grateful to ICEDS. There's of course myself working on this project and Professor Lahiriya, and also partners that we have in India, Mr. Pandya Banerjee, a PhD student there, and local NGOs as well working on the project, combined with our advisory group, which comprises of different bodies within the ANU. So basically, our project was focused on Goramora Island in India, which is in the Indian Sundarbans. a lot of research has been done on the Bangladesh side of the Sundarbans, but not so much on the Indian side. And Goromora Island is an island which is due to be submerged by 2050. Already a third of the island has been submerged, and there's about 3,000 people currently living there. And you know, basically, there's only been a supported migration strategy for about 30 people, and the rest, you know, have to make do with frequent cyclones. There's been about 4 cyclones in the past 2 years of increased intensity. There is increased salinity of the soil and crop failure. So it's, you know, it's been a very difficult situation there. So our work, though, was not just looking at climate change on the island, but was mainly looking at the differential aspects, looking at how it affects women differently, looking at how it affects people with disabilities, how it affects the elderly. And in terms of our methodology, we undertook in-depth qualitative interviews with about 60 people, and also, you know, a multi-scalar analysis of the situation, looking at the political economy of the island, and combined that with a photo voice, where we gave cameras to women and affected communities so that they could take photographs of their situation. So some of our core findings at the moment, and we're still working on this, like many places, we found that many men were migrating for work, often in very exploitative conditions, leaving women, people with disabilities and the elderly behind to basically manage the frequent cyclones and disasters. So there's rapidly changing dynamics on the island. Also, we felt that, you know, many climate adaptation policies, they didn't address the most vulnerable. They were very much a cookie cutter, one size all fits all approach. We also saw children's development impacted and social protection schemes not reaching the most vulnerable. We saw that for many, you know, they needed supported migration assistance as well, in addition to adaptation strategies. And there was a lack of coordination between the agencies. So that's not the end of our research, and we're really grateful to ICEDS for this funding. We're currently in the stage of developing phase 2 and phase 3. And with phase 2, we plan to continue our work on Goromora Island, combining our qualitative analysis with quantitative analysis, and also developing and testing a toolkit and training guide based on some of the work that Professor Lahiri has done. That's in our second phase, and in our third phase, we're also speaking to other partners who are working in similar surroundings, such as in Bangladesh and the Philippines, as well as in other parts of the Pacific. And we're currently developing those phases, so we're really interested to talk to people who might have ideas or input into that, and also seeking further funding options. Thank you so much.
So that was that's quite confronting, wasn't it? Thanks, everyone. So now we're on to quite a different topic, and I'd like to welcome Dr. Alireza Rabhari, I hope I understood that name correctly, who is a research fellow in the Zero Carbon Energy for the Asia Pacific Initiative, which is one of our main challenges. And he is going to present something which could be quite transformational, I think, which is an experimental study on novel hybrid hydrogen-directed plasma reduction of iron ore. Thank you very much.
Yes. Thank you, Roslyn, and thanks for providing this opportunity. So the topic is from experimental study on hybrid hydrogen-directed plasma reduction of iron ore. This is an interdisciplinary project between the Research School of Engineering and the Research School of Physics, and we have the number of So the main motivation behind this work is that iron is still making accounts for something around 7 to 9% of global GHG emissions. And this is a huge number. Even reducing the emissions by 50% will not get us over the line as far as the Paris Agreement targets are. In case of Australia, Australia is a major exporter of iron ore. We are mining 900 million tons of iron ore each year, and nearly most of them is exported, and a tiny fraction of that is converted to steel. The good thing is that our mining takes place in one of the sunniest regions in the world. So this is the heat map of the Australia, and as you can see, the solar radiation availability in western and northern South Australia is one of the best in the world. But the problem is that there is no technology to convert iron ore into the steel product using renewable energy resources. So the main question is that can Australia take benefit from this co-location of renewable energy resources and iron ore mines? So there are different technologies to convert iron ore into steel products. So these are zero carbon steel making technologies. We have biomass, hydrogen, and electricity based routes. But there are lots of challenges associated with each process. For example, in the case of biomass, we've got land use change emissions or biomass availability to process iron ore into the final product. In case of the last two options, electrowinning and pyroelectrolysis, these technologies are low temperature and high temperature electricity-based routes. And these technologies have low efficiencies and also at earlier stage of research. But hydrogen-based route, based on the recent study, this is the most promising technology from both economic and environmental standpoint. But the main challenge is that it's got lots of impurities. The iron ore has got lots of impurities, and we need to separate the impurities. And these impurities remain unresolved in the solid phase. So we need to either use a downstream melting process to remove the impurities, or we need to further improve the grade of iron ore by upstream, improving the grade from low or mid grade to high grade ores. Australian iron ore has low and mid grade ores, so we need to improve the quality. And then in case of all these technologies, we've got the issue with renewable energy integration for larger scale steel production. So what we have proposed here, we focus on this hydrogen-based route. We found that the issue with this hydrogen-based route is that the process is super slow. And if you can use plasma, it can accelerate the process, and it offers a way to more effective and efficient way of using the hydrogen in the final reduction step. And also the final product is going to be the molten iron. So the good thing is that we can remove the impurities this case. So what we did is that, as you can see in this figure, we've been able to use the iron ore pellets. So pellets are particles with 5 to 7 millimeter. We've been able to convert the iron ore into metallic iron, and that was the main achievement from this process. And we did that through the MAGPI facilities, magnetized plasma facility in the research school of physics. And with this ICEDS funding, I was able to receive 260K grant from HILCRC, Heavy Industry Low Carbon Transition Cooperative Research Center. HILCRC does with the different research programs, process technologies, cross-linking technologies, and facilitating technology. And in this project, we are planning to develop an experimental setup for this hybrid plant and understand the techno-economic assessment of this green technology, and also understand the effect of ore grades and also removing the impurities from the final product, and finally conceptualize the design for larger scale operation. That's going to be the big achievement. And I really appreciate ICEDS for providing this opportunity, and we could expand our research in this direction.
Thank you. I look forward to seeing what happens in the next steps of your research. It sounds really exciting at Eraser. I would now like to welcome Professor Ilya Shadrivov from the ANU Research School of Physics to present another potentially transformational technology about how we might eliminate the need for storage and transportation of hydrogen in gaseous form through hydrogen generation from widely available inorganic materials. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. And I'm going to talk about like safe production and usage of hydrogen that we propose to do. And people are talking about the use of hydrogen as a fuel for quite some time. And actually, the hydrogen cars were produced for over a decade, but we don't see many of them around. There's probably about 10 of them in Canberra. So what's the problem? Main problem is that it's very hard to store hydrogen. It's the smallest atom. It can penetrate in a lot of materials, deteriorate their quality. So we have to develop specialized storage, specialized transportation methods. Second problem is energy density. It has very low energy density, even when you compress it a lot. So we have to have really huge volumes in order to be able to transport it and use it efficiently. So what are current green methods of producing hydrogen? We're using electrolysis, where we're taking water and applying electric field and splitting our hydrogen and oxygen and water, and we're using hydrogen. Are there any, and of course, this can be done only if you have a large supply of pure water and a lot of electricity. And of course, this is not often where you want to use this hydrogen. You need to always transport and store. Can we extract hydrogen from water in a different way? If you know, in air, we can burn it, for example, a piece of paper, and burning will take oxygen out of air. There are materials that will burn in water as well. Of course, we don't want materials that are going to burn in water naturally, because they won't be very safe. There are such materials. So what we are working on, we actually developed several materials that we can use that are absolutely safe in normal conditions. However, when we expose them to certain physical conditions, one of them being laser radiation, we can start this reaction very quickly. This material will burn in water and will grab oxygen from water molecules and release pure hydrogen. So this is how we envisage our green process of the future. So we use green power, process commonly available ores and materials, and produce our solid hydrogen cells, as we call them. And they're safe to store, transport. We transport them to consumer using established transportation routes. They can be stored almost indefinitely in normal conditions. And when a person or like someone needs to extract hydrogen, then they can do this very quickly using our technology on site and when it's needed. What in terms of energy density? For energy density, if we, okay, I apologize, the slide was distorted. So if we take the lithium ion batteries, for example, compressed hydrogen, liquid hydrogen, ammonia, or even diesel, they contain a certain amount of energy per volume, and our solid hydrogen cells beat all of those. So we can be very efficient in terms of energy density that we can store. What about cost comparison to other fuels or to other ways of using hydrogen? When you're storing hydrogen, it costs you money because, for example, when it's cooled hydrogen, you have to keep cooling it to keep it, and the longer you store it, the more it costs you to store. So for our technology, of course, initial cost of hydrogen that we're producing is higher than electrolysis because it's a slightly more complex process, but at the same time, it doesn't matter how long we store it. So we can store it and transport it and use it when needed. So I don't know what's taking to slide, they completely distorted. So I apologize about that. So there's a number of industries that are going to use hydrogen, and it's a huge market, and we see the biggest advantage for our technology on using on mobile platforms, especially for powering heavy vehicles and in shipping industries. So, for example, if we're using long-haul shipping, those huge ships that transport goods across the oceans, of course, you cannot put solar panels, you cannot put batteries on it. There's no alternatives at the moment with diesel for those ships. And our technology will allow to load the solid materials and use them up as it is needed to produce hydrogen, and then power these bolts. And this.
Thank you very much. Well, you're not, I feel successful. Fantastic. I would like now to introduce Jessie Moritz. Jessie is a lecturer at the ANU Centre for Arab and Islamic Studies, and she's going to present to us on an agenda for Australian research on climate and energy security. Thanks, Jessie.
Thank you so much for having me. So the project that we have developed with the ICEDS funding was really trying to understand how can we treat in Australia to policymakers. We could see that there was clear appetite among policymakers for increasing evidence-based policy, but the connections between researchers and policymakers tended to occur in a little bit of an ad hoc manner. It depended on your personal kind of relationships that you've developed over 20, 30 years. That particularly disadvantaged, for example, ECR researchers who are working on really interesting and relevant projects. This project is specifically focused on climate, energy, and natural disaster security issues, very broadly defined. So what we did is we wanted to try and understand what are the government priority areas for engaging with researchers specifically. Where do they see that there could be productive collaborations that aren't already happening? And how can we link up with the many different connections that are happening between researchers and policymakers and see if we can kind of leverage and expand those connections? So what we did is we just finished up phase 1 and we're moving into phase 2. So in phase 1, we met with public sector stakeholders. We had 14 meetings across different government departments, trying to map who is working on these issues. There's so many different little climate and energy security relevant sections of multiple government departments. We only focus on federal government. We'll get to state and local policy in a future project. It's too much for one project. And we tried to talk to policymakers about how do you want to talk, how do you want to engage with researchers, and what type of research, what do you see as the knowledge gaps that researchers can help to build? In phase 2, which we're moving into now, we're designing sessions for engagement between policymakers and researchers. And I'll go through the themes that we have identified in a second, and this is kind of also a call for participation in this project, both to researchers, but also especially to policymakers. If you haven't heard about this project yet through your service department, please come talk to me afterwards so that we can make sure that we get as much coverage as possible through these sessions. What we wanted to do was not only to connect researchers, but try to identify specific tangible opportunities for collaboration in the next 12 months or in the coming years. When we talked to policymakers, they were also very clear that they're very time poor, they're extremely busy at the moment trying to implement these ambitious projects. And so they wanted to try and have tangible kind of discrete outcomes from each of the sessions as well. So we've been working with them to try to design those and try to create something that's really valuable use of their time and our time. Once we finish those engagement sessions, we're then going to create a report. It's related to the title of this project, an agenda for Australian research on climate and energy security, both nationally in Australia and in Australia's overseas engagements. And we want that report to be published open access. The sessions will be held with Chatham House rule, but we will publish the sort of research gaps that are identified through those sessions. It will be open access, and it means that the next round of grants or the next round of funding that you're going for as a researcher, you can point to this document and say, this, I'm working on an identified priority area as policymakers sort of express an interest in through this project. So that's the idea. So what did we see in phase 1? So I wanted to kind of go through, I'm sorry, there's a lot of text on the slide. I've got sort of little project report documents if you think one of these topics would be relevant to you. But the first session on which policymakers expressed a clear interest is on engagement with the Pacific Islands and understanding and engaging with the Pacific Step Up project. So I'm very grateful to my collaborators on this project who are designing this part. So Dr. George Carter in particular is the director of the ANU Institute for Pacific Studies. And so he's designing this collaboration. We think we might be able to get some Pacific Islands researchers and policymakers involved as well in a hybrid fashion. So we're going to try and have 30 people from Australia, policymakers and researchers, and 30 from the Pacific Islands. Second theme is disruptive technologies. So even some of the presentations I saw here today would be relevant, particularly the Defence Science and Technology Group expressed clear interest in understanding what is going to be the next wave of technologies that are going to reshape the renewable energy and the climate transition. Third session that they've identified is climate security and natural disaster preparedness. And there have been ANU engagements with policymakers on these issues already. And so we've also tried to connect with the ANU engagements. So there was a session last year that RegNet ran on natural disaster preparedness. So we've now connected with them and we're trying to collaborate with them in organizing and running this session. And finally, societal security during decarbonisation. This is envisaged to include both sort of geopolitical transformations, but also social justice during renewable energy and climate transition for Australia and for our nearby neighbours. And we've left one session clear because we're still looking for topics and we want to leave some flexibility in the project for engaging with policymakers. So again, this is kind of a call out for policymakers and researchers. If you would like to participate in this project, please come and talk to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jessie. I look forward to seeing how some of those develop. And last but definitely not least, we have Naomi Hay and Jeremy Smith. Naomi is a lecturer at the ANU School of Art and Design, and Jeremy is a senior lecturer at the ANU College of Engineering, Computing and Cybernetics. And they're going to be presenting some research that we've been doing together in the Northern Rivers, where you would all be familiar with the catastrophic flooding around Lismore. And so our project is titled The People's Catchment, evaluating and supporting the development of a community intelligence network in the New South Wales Northern Rivers. Thanks very much, Naomi and Jeremy.
Thanks, Roslyn. So as highlighted, we have been working with a multidisciplinary team of ANU researchers and students alongside community members from the Northern Rivers of New South Wales on the development of a community-led flood intelligence network following the devastating floods of February and March in 2022. The image you can see here is Lismore just over 12 months ago. In the month following the floods, Annie Pearce from the Shannon, a community about 25 minutes north of Lismore, approached Roslyn with an email from which you can see the quote here. Annie previously headed up the Gasville-Free Community Strategy, and then she also went on to work for Lock the Gate Alliance. As Annie explained, I find myself in the midst of a disaster zone with people who are now broken by the disaster of the disaster response. Annie highlighted what many residents experience: failure of official rainfall and water level monitoring systems, where equipment either stopped working outright or potentially even worse, provided inaccurate data. So this directly impacted warning systems and evacuations, with people unable to make decisions to protect property around and lives around the catchment and in downstream communities, including Lismore. So the initial correspondence with Annie led to the People's Catchment Project, situated in the upper catchment areas of the Wilson's River, part of Lismore's ongoing flood risk. The project centred on the impact of communities and used a strength-based approach to bring ANU expertise and resources from staff and students together in a transdisciplinary to complement the local knowledge and lived experience of the residents. The research examined how the implementation of a community-led system can complement and strengthen existing warning systems, and analysed how this system can enhance responses to flooding and support community resilience. Activities including investigating institutional and governance arrangements, social science research, hydrological modelling, and technology design, assessment and implementation have been undertaken.
The failures of systems, organisations and equipment occurred in the 2020 floods, reinforced the mounting lack of trust in institutions in response through multiple disasters in recent years. Recognising the potential for further significant rainfall and hence flooding during 2022, communities to take matters into their own hands. They could not wait until inquiries, reports, and further funding became available. Working with the community centre on the Shannon during 2022, a network to collect and share rainfall data as the initial indicator of flood risk was established. This consists of a network of 11 rainfall observers, locations, compared to green triangles. Here you can see through the catchment area, compared to 2 government assets that used to collect rainfall data during the 2022 floods in the same catchment area. The network is supported by hydrological modelling and global history to identify key locations in the catchment for sites, and makes use of internet-enabled personal weather stations supported by a citizens band UHF radio network. And communication with mobile coverage is down, which is common during flooding and rain events. A community emergency hub in Shannon has been established to receive, consolidate, and retransmit this intelligence to residents, as well as share with the local SES to support their official learning processes. Combined, providing greater coverage, accuracy, and redundancy of communities to support them during flood events or potential flood events. The ICEDS research has also explored failures that occurred and assessed the potential of the work for communities in the Northern Rivers and potentially other parts of New South Wales and other states. This examined the broader context of flood monitoring, intelligence and warning in the area to identify lessons and learning for other communities and agencies and organisations. This highlighted broad support for the concept, enabled by emerging technologies and citizen science approaches, driven by the strong community-led nature of the work. There are questions around effective governance and ongoing sustainability in the race. Broadly, the approach aligns with calls to support, enable, and empower local capacity for resilience, made within the standard framework for disaster response. Other prototyping has been completed to support community aspirations, including presentation of data via websites and apps, shown in the wireframes here, and further technology development and testing of monitoring equipment. Project to strengthen ties to the ICEDS nature-based solutions for flood mitigation projects with CSRO, as well as local organisations such as land care groups and the Lismore Living Lab initiative, which is aims to reconceptualise flood planning, management and response in Northern Rivers. Within the last few weeks, a $1.6 million application to the Disaster Ready Fund has been submitted to finalise implementation of all aspects of the flood monitoring system, evaluate the project, work with other communities in Mullumbimby and Maroondah to set up their own networks, and allow lessons and work here to be shared broadly to support greater resilience for local communities by facing risk from disasters in the decades. So thank you for all those who've been involved.
Thank you very much, Larry and Jeremy, and we hope we get that $1.6 million disaster relief grant so that the country can be much more prepared for the inevitable extreme floods into the future. And so now that presentation concludes our showcase. Unfortunately, those of you who are really looking forward to Martin Amady's presentation on renewable energy for agriculture. Martin's ill today and hasn't been able to attend, but you will be able to see his presentation online because we'll be providing a recording. So I'm sorry about that, but you won't miss out again. And so, as I said, we've now completed our showcase of new climate energy and disaster research. I'd like to thank all of the presenters today for sharing insights from their projects. I'm sure that everyone would agree that this is very insightful. The presenters will be available to answer any of your questions during the lunch. As I said, they'll be seated at tables in the foyer. And finally, I would like to thank the Vice-Chancellor for taking a lot of time to join us today and offer his remarks. We know he's very busy, but we also know he's very committed to this area. An event recording will be available on the ICEDS website really shortly, so please join me in a final thank you to today's speakers.